Welcome to another season of the Apollo Papyrus Podcast. I am Aaron Apollo Camp, the host of this podcast and a multi-genre author who is currently writing multiple fiction, nonfiction, and poetry books. For the 9th season of this podcast, the podcast has a new look with a new logo and new graphic design elements. However, if you've listened to this podcast previously, you will find the content of this podcast to be very similar to what you've listened to in prior seasons. As I have done in previous seasons of this podcast, most episodes in Season 9 will feature my interview with one or more authors or other important people in the writing, literature, and book publishing universe, such as, but not limited to, editors, publishers, book marketing specialists, audiobook producers, and others. Sometimes I'll interview other types of writers, such as playwrights, screenwriters, bloggers, article writers, and others, although most of my interview guests will be involved in the book writing world in some way. The core mission of this podcast is to help our listeners find their writing and reading purpose. In addition to interviewing others involved with writing or writing-adjacent work, I may, from time to time, provide my thoughts, advice, and/or opinion about current events in the writing world in a solo episode. Unlike recent past seasons of the podcast, Season 9 will be the only season of the podcast in 2025, and it will run from February to October. I hope y'all enjoy the 9th season of the Apollo Papyrus Podcast, and remember to check back often for new episodes. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2025, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.